So I'm Jeff Brown. This is Saturday morning breakfast. Oh yeah, without breakfast. And before we start today, I've got a few announcements. We have Jan Turnquist. She's the director of the Alcott House, and she'll be doing a performance in costume, pretending she's Louisa May, and she'll have a performance for about 30 minutes, and then she'll ask questions, but she's still gonna be in character. So you can't ask questions about Trump or, whatever. So anyway, that'll be interesting. So that'll be next month. So soon we'll have Jim Edelhauser talking about nuclear energy. But if you've ever been to a Saturday morning breakfast live long time ago, we used to get in a circle and ask a question of the day. So I've got a question of the day, but I only want 1 or 2 word answers. And that is, what is your impression of nuclear energy? I just want to get a reading on what people are thinking before Jim talks. And as far as questions, as we go, we've got 21 people. Maybe put in the chat, just write the fact that you do have a question, and when there's an opportunity, I will call on you. But we'll see how that goes as we go along. So anyway, I'll call on you, and if you have an answer, great. If you don't have an answer to the question, just pass. So I see Rick Gentleman here. Ricks, what's your impression in 1 or 2 words about nuclear energy?
I'm all for it.
All for it. Okay, that's good. How about Wanda?
Well, I'm all for it, but I think it needs better management.
Okay. Joan Salge Blake.
Yeah, I'm for it also, but you've got to deal with the waste.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Pat Storn.
Concerned.
What'd you say, Pat?
Concerned. Can you hear me?
Oh, concerned. Yeah, got it.
Concerned.
Okay. Let's see. Arnold Epstein.
Possibly necessary.
Possibly necessary. Okay. Carolyn.
It's our way out of this climate mess.
Okay. And you're from the Littleton Church? Is that right? Yes. Well, welcome.
Yes. Thank you.
James Stalley.
Staley, I am for it generally, but I don't see any way around the waste problem because of the long half-life.
Okay. All right. John Kendrick.
4 words: promising, and also potentially catastrophically dangerous.
Okay. All right. Kevin O'Brien.
I'm open to it.
Okay, good. Liz Mosley.
Scary because of the waste.
Okay. Nancy Fredericks.
Same with me with the waste, but I think we're going to have to do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Rick and Sharon.
Problem with waste.
Okay. Let's see. Where am I? Katie Weeks.
This is Dave speaking for.
Dave.
Yeah. Interested, but very concerned about the full life cycle, including waste, including that sort of thing.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks. William Froberg.
Sorry, I just joined. What's the question?
The question was, what's your 1 or 2 word impression of nuclear energy?
I'd have to go very much with what Dave just said. I really, over all of the years that it's been used and considered, I still am not clear what the intent is with the waste.
Okay, all right. I've got listed here the hires.
Yeah, this is Gail Hire. I think it seems very efficient.
Okay, all right. Good. So did I. Arnold Epstein, I don't think I've done you.
You did. I said possibly necessary.
Oh, okay, good. Anybody else that Lee, did I get you, Lee?
Nope.
Go ahead.
What happened to fusion?
Okay. Is there anybody that I missed?
Yes.
Roy.
Yes.
Roy, go ahead, Roy.
Yeah, I say we got to figure this out. We need it.
Okay. Yeah. All right, good. So now is time for our speaker, Jim Edelhauser.
Morning.
There you go, Jim.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I hope that I can share some things with you today. I'm not a practiced speaker, but I'll give it my best shot. I'll give you a little bit of my background. Jeff has introduced me as an expert in nuclear energy. If I'm an expert from immersion in it. By education and training, I have a master's in electrical engineering in power engineering. So my entry into the business was that I was employed after college with an electric utility, and ended up very early taking a position at the nuclear plant that they owned in, it was actually in New Jersey. So from that time on, I've worked 45 years in the nuclear power business in many roles and levels of responsibility, but including being trained and licensed as a senior reactor operator. I worked in work management. I worked in engineering as the electrical design supervisor. I worked as a project manager. I spent my career split between working as a full-time employee for electric utilities, 3 different utilities over the years, and almost equally as a contractor or consultant, working at various nuclear sites across the country. So over the course of my career, I lived in as many as 15 different states and worked at as many nuclear sites. So I have a broad experience. Unlike many of the people that have worked and are working in the industry, I did not come up through the Navy program of nuclear power. I almost feel, though, just by exposure, that I could tell you all the sea stories and experiences on the boat only because of how many I've heard over the years. But my experience has been totally civilian. So that being said, I've done my best to create a PowerPoint to lead me through so I don't get lost and hopefully keep me on track. It is definitely a very technical business, and as such, I have to be really careful of, as they say, going down the rabbit hole and getting two details. We have as I can see, we have a pretty varied group here. But I would suspect that no one has much experience with commercial nuclear power. So I'm going to do my best to give an overview, and hopefully it'll be informative, and my wife would say not a chance that it'll be entertaining, but that's how it goes. As an engineer, I'm probably pretty dry. So, except here's my buddy Homer. This is probably how many people view nuclear power. I'm going to say it, some idiot sitting in a control room, a little overwhelmed, not knowing what to do, and quite possibly making a mess of it. I, however, believe that's pretty far from the truth, but we'll see. So I thought it's a good idea to start out with a bit of history. So nuclear power in this country was first developed, some people may say out of necessity, with the Manhattan Project in Chicago, as we were in fierce competition to develop nuclear weapons before the Germans did in World War II. When we came out of World War II, the government continued with development of nuclear energy. Aside from the weapons program, they entered into development of civilian commercial power. So in 1948, the first electricity generated by a nuclear power reactor was accomplished at Oak Ridge Department of Energy facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So that gives you some perspective. So that was the first time that they actually used nuclear power to generate electricity. It continued for some time after that. The government obviously saw that there was a place for it in their programs, and the first nuclear-powered submarine, the Nautilus, was launched in 1954. The government had also tried, the military, they had tried to develop a nuclear-powered airplane. They also had plans and tried to have small nuclear power plants to power expedition sites such as the North Pole. Neither of those really came to fruition, but they found that the whole thing with having nuclear-powered vessels, specifically the submarine, to be a good use. So kind of as a note, I put there that the first submarine to complete the submerged transit of the North Pole was in 1958, and that was by the Nautilus. And this was only able to be done because by powering a submarine with a nuclear reactor, it could stay submerged for extended periods of time. And just as a note, over the time, if you look today, there are roughly 80 Navy vessels that are powered by nuclear power, most of them submarines, but they also include aircraft carriers and cruisers. So they still have a pretty active fleet and still continue to improve the technology. But on the civilian commercial side, the first plants to come online were in the late 60s. And they were, just as a note, just as perspective, probably the first plants cost about $150 million to build each one. And somewhat like everything else over the years, they have become more and more expensive as time went on. From 1970 through 1990, I consider that the heyday of commercial nuclear power plants. At the peak, which was probably in the late 80s, early 90s, there were 108 operating nuclear reactors producing electricity in the United States, producing greater than 20% of all the electric power in the United States. Today, there are only 94 reactors continuing to operate, and also today, there are only 2 new plants under construction. And we'll get into it a little bit later on, but as a result of the worldwide nuclear disasters, that the risk and the interest in continuing with building plants has waned. And right now, there are only 2 new plants being built. They're at the Vogtle plant in Georgia, Waynesboro, Georgia. The cost now for the 2 plants combined is about $14 billion. So it's a pretty big price tag. And I'll say that it is equally, if not more, the result, the not building more plants is the result of the cost and the fact that inexpensive natural gas, which is being used in most of the new fossil plants, is at such a low cost that it makes it difficult, or would make it difficult for a new plant to compete in the power market. So moving on, here's a picture of the Nautilus. It's in Groton, Connecticut. If any of you wanted to take a road trip, you can go down to Groton. It is actually open to the public. I've been on it. It's a little bit of an eye-opener getting on a submarine and seeing how these guys live. I mean, literally, some of them with the ballistic missile submarines, they go out for 3 months and they never surface. So these guys, over 100 of them, live in one of these submarines for 3 months without seeing the sunshine. It's it wouldn't have been for me, but in any case, it's a interesting take. When I went, they did not have what they call the machinery space available for the tour, and the machinery space is where the reactor and the control room are. But you can at least get a view of how the guys live, the bunks, and their little cafeterias and such. Anyway, it's a good take. So just a little primer. Nuclear power plants convert the energy released from nuclear fission to boil water and power steam turbines. This is just a little depiction showing the reactor building where the reactor core is. That's where the power is generated. From that point on, it's no different in many ways than what you would get at a coal plant, an oil plant, or a gas-fired plant. You generate steam, it goes through a turbine. The turbine spins the generator, which is connected to the grid. The exhaust from the turbine needs to be cooled and condensed back into water so that it can be circulated back through the heat source. And that condensing of the steam is done by cooling water provided by either a river, an ocean, or in this case, it shows a cooling tower. So the cooling tower, you see one on the horizon as you might be driving down a highway or something, is not necessarily indicative of a nuclear power plant. In fact, many of the plants that I work at did not have cooling towers. And also, especially if you had been down in Fall River, the Brighton Brayton Point plant there, which was an oil-fired plant, had cooling towers right next to I-195, just over the Braca Bridge. Okay, so the technology of nuclear fission. Fission takes place in a nuclear reactor when a neutron hits the nucleus of uranium-235. The nucleus splits into two pieces, two smaller parts, and releases energy, lots of it, and also a couple more neutrons. On the average with nuclear fission, you get 2.5 neutrons per fission. And really what that means is sometimes you get 2, sometimes you get 3. But on the average, when they're doing their calculations, 2.5. So these extra neutrons, they can hit other uranium atoms, causing another fission, or they can be absorbed in other material within the reactor. This is a really important point as far as understanding, because as a layman, you might say, well, if you've got 2 or greater neutrons released by fission, if that then one fission would lead to 2, would lead to 4, would lead to 16, how do you control it? And somewhat complicated, but it's maintained by keeping a balance of the neutron population in the reactor. And this is done as from a controls perspective by having control rods, which are made of a material that absorbs neutrons, thus removing them from the reaction in the reactor and controlling, and the term is the chain reaction. So that is at a very high level, the concept of fission. So what we have here is a little depiction. We see at the top, that little ball is a neutron impacting an atom of uranium-235. It shows the next state, which is uranium-236, because it took on another neutron, and it's showing it in an excited state, and then it stabilizes by breaking into 2 parts. The yellow starburst is the energy, and then 3 more neutrons. If you were to do the math, you'll see that the uranium-236 breaks into 2 pieces. In this case, it's krypton-92 and barium-141, and 3 neutrons. If you add up the numbers, 92, 141, and 3 adds up to 236. It's probably too much at the layman level, but basically it's the conservation of matter. It always adds up to the same number. Just a note, it doesn't always split in the same way. There are, again, based on like probabilities or percentages, it is predictable how it splits, but it's not always the same way. So here's your nuclear chain reaction. One neutron, one uranium-235 atom splits, breaks up into fission products, 3 more neutrons. One hits the uranium-238, one hits 235, and the other one gets absorbed somewhere else. So just as a note, so what they're saying is only 2 of the 3 create another fission, and then it goes on. So, and I am going to go over what these numbers mean in a little bit. Again, it may be a little bit too much, but I felt remiss if I didn't go over it. Little thing. So early on, people actually were excited about the advent of nuclear power. Walt Disney himself was a real advocate. In fact, I'd read that he had intended to power Disneyland with a nuclear reactor. It didn't happen, but he, as a concept, that's what he thought. And as such, I think this is in 1957, Disney made a movie called Our Friend the Atom, and it was, you know, kind of a cartoonish rendition, but it I remember seeing it as a kid. I was pretty young back then. But in any case, under it, there's, and you can find this on YouTube, it's the mousetrap demonstration. Now, unfortunately, I did not load the little video, but what it is, this is a depiction of a chain reaction. And it's actually, as a visual, it's great because it gives you an idea. Every one of the mousetraps are loaded, and they put 2 ping pong balls on each one. And this is kind of to represent neutrons. And they started off by tossing one ping pong ball into the mix, and it trips one of the mouse traps. 2 more of those ping pong balls go, and very rapidly, every one of the mouse traps ends up springing, and ping pong balls are flying all over the place. But it's, you know, as a visual, it's a pretty good thing. You can look it up on YouTube if you know, if you have 10 minutes and want to see what I was talking about. So, nuclear fuel. And this is where I'm going to start to go down the rabbit hole a little bit. But we hear about this all the time. Enrichment. So enrichment's an extremely complex process, you know, and candidly, it is only done at government facilities. They're scattered at a number of places in the U.S. There's one in, I think it's Paducah, Kentucky, Portsmouth, Ohio are the principal ones that I'm familiar with, but where they take uranium, and as you can see from the screen, naturally occurring uranium is 99.7% uranium. I've got them mixed up there. Okay, uranium-238 and 0.7% uranium-235. If I ever use this again, I'll have to correct the numbers. So it means a very little bit of uranium-235. Only the uranium-235 is fissionable. The uranium-238, when it gets hit with a neutron, something else happens. So I'll talk about that later. But it doesn't fission. So in order to support a chain reaction in the commercial nuclear reactor, you need the percentage of uranium-235 enriched or increased to about 5%. And that's what they do. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see what are actually real fuel assemblies. They're made of half-inch zircaloy tubes that are filled with ceramic pellets. They're actually little cylinders about a half an inch in diameter and about a half an inch high. And they're stacked up in these tubes and sealed. The fuel assembly is made of 64 of these tubes, 8 by 8. And it weighs a bit over 600 pounds. And it's 16 feet tall. Anyway, gives you a perspective. These are loaded into the reactor. I think where the last place that I worked, Pilgrim Station in Plymouth, had in their core at all, it's loaded with approximately 680 of these fuel assemblies. Just a note, again, little perspective. Each one of those assemblies, I don't know what today's cost is, but I know that when I was working, and the last I heard, that somewhere in excess of $250,000 each. So, I'm going to talk about isotopes. I'm not just very quickly because this is like nuclear physics, and it can be boring as hell, although very complicated. So, the physical and chemical properties of a material is determined by the number of protons in the nucleus. And the nuclear properties are determined by the number of neutrons in the nucleus. It's actually the combination of neutrons and protons. So the total number of protons and neutrons in a nucleus determines what the isotopic number is. So for uranium, like 235, and I should have done the math ahead of time, but it has 92 protons. Hence, that's what determines what the chemical properties are, and whatever 235 minus 92 is. So it's got to be 8, 5, 13, 143. All right, quick math. But in any case, and the uranium-238 would have 3 more neutrons. Not particularly exciting, but that's how it is. So what I did, this screen gives you very simply, if you're looking at hydrogen, there's 3 naturally occurring isotopes. Hydrogen 1, protium, hydrogen 2, deuterium, and hydrogen 3, tritium. You can see by the little cartoon there, the protium has 1 proton, no neutrons in the nucleus. Deuterium has a proton and a neutron, and tritium has a proton and 2 neutrons. So H1 and H2, protium and deuterium, are both stable, no radioactive decay. The tritium has a radioactive decay half-life of approximately 12.5 years. So some of you may have heard about half-lives, and this is, when you talk about spent fuel or whatever, how long it stays around and stuff, it has to do with the half-life, which means that no more that after that half-life. In other words, if you had 100 tritium atoms at the start of a period, 12.5 years later, there would be 50 of them left. And that's just simply what it is. So that's, and I only brought up isotopes because talking about uranium-235 and uranium-238 and other isotopes, that's what it is. Okay, radioactive decay. So it's the process. I talked about nucleuses being stable and those being unstable. Stable material, it's just that it doesn't change over time. But unstable, again, the jargon of the technology is the nucleus is in an excited state, and somehow it has to give up energy in order to become stable. And there's 3 kinds of radiation There's alpha decay, beta decay, gamma decay. Alpha decay is when the nucleus ejects an alpha particle, which is 2 neutrons and 2 protons. It's actually would be the nucleus of a atom of helium. Beta decay is when one of the protons ejects a neutron, and hence, it ejects an electron, and hence it loses a negative charge, and then it changes it into a neutron. And then gamma decay. So just about with any type of decay, when the alpha decay, it always, in addition to giving off an alpha, it gives off some gamma. And what is gamma? Gamma is radiation is really no different than an X-ray. And actually, if you were measuring radioactivity and you measured a photon, you measured a ray, you couldn't tell whether it was from X-ray or from a gamma. But bottom line is, it's like light. Actually, it's no different than light. It's a light wave, although it's at a higher energy level, and we can't see it. It's beyond the visible spectrum. So that's radioactive decay. Very simply, and probably pretty boring, but well, it may come into play later. So here we see the 3 different types. We see the alpha, the Bravo, and the gamma. The alpha, it only can travel a short distance, a couple inches in air, and in fact can be stopped by a piece of paper. Beta is has a little, it's smaller, and so that it's more penetrating, but it can be stopped by a very thin sheet of glass. Gamma, however, is like X-ray, and we all know, we have plenty of experience with X-ray, chest X-rays, dental X-rays. We all see that the technician, when we get a chest X-ray, they get us all situated. If they're, they may put lead blankets over other parts of our body from whatever the target area is. And the technician goes either behind a shield or they go out of the room so they don't get exposed, because the gamma is very penetrating. Well, hence, it's the same as X-ray. So just a little visual there. So what does it all mean? And this is also true of X-ray. All radiation, all radioactivity, all radiation causes damage to human cells. We are surrounded by radiation in our normal lives. We get cosmic rays. You're getting this all the time. You get X-rays, and there are radioactive materials around us. Your little smoke detector has a radioactive source in it. That's how it works. Some ceramic material, some of the colors, they found the use of it. Found, I think it was like yellow or orange. Years ago, you'd have these very bright pieces of dishware. They actually had a pretty good, gave off a pretty fair amount of
Yestaware.
Yeah. So they got rid of them. It wasn't dangerous, but in any case, it's all around us. Just as a note, if you take a transatlantic flight round trip, the additional radiation that you get from that is equivalent to about 5 chest X-rays. Just perspective. Nobody, says, "Oh, don't go on a flight because you're going to get some radiation." But again, the body has an ability to repair minor cell damage. It's only when we exceed that ability, more than the body can handle, that it has lasting effects. Hence, at the nuclear plants, they have safety procedures and policies to protect the workers. And they also have a responsibility, regulated responsibility to protect the public. So if anybody has any questions later on, I can answer questions about, maybe how it was working 45 years and getting exposed to radiation. Okay, so the issues, and I think this, came up in the original question. People are, what are they, anti-nukes? And it's not only anti-nukes. And what do normal people, regular people, what do they worry about? Well, one, which I don't have much experience was the health risks from the mining of the uranium. And I mean, especially in the beginning, it's probably like so many other industries they didn't have the controls or regulations, maybe because they didn't know much, but they had workers working in the mines that got exposed, actually had inhalation doses. And that's actually the worst thing you can do, is get a radioactive material inside your body, because the body treats it, like chemically, so it does with it whatever it would do with that chemical. And so it sits there, and then the radiation affects only the small number of cells that surround that material. They also, made a mess with the waste from the mines. They called it tailings, and didn't put it back in the mines, left it all around, got washed away into surface water and stuff. And hence, today there's no active mining of uranium in the U.S. today. We buy all of our uranium from outside the U.S. But the regulations have become more stringent, and if they do recommence mining, I would expect it would be more controlled. We also worry about large accidents like 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl and Fukushima, and spreading radioactive material. And I'm going to go over actually go over the accidents. Also, contamination of the groundwater by leaks on the reactor sites. I can say that, not that it's never happened, but they go to every effort to do cleanup, and they monitor the groundwater and make sure there hasn't been any spread. I can also talk about that later. Nuclear weapons proliferation, it's the idea, some sabotage of a plant or diverting nuclear fuel, and then disposal of spent nuclear fuel. I heard that brought up a number of times in the original question, so we'll talk about that a bit after. 3 Mile Island. I think everybody knows 3 Mile Island. It was the most serious accident in U.S. commercial nuclear power. However, as scary as it was, there were no deaths or injuries to plant workers or members of the nearby population. It did render that reactor, with all that investment in it, unusable going in the future. And they spent a boatload of money trying to clean it up and have done quite a bit of the cleanup to date. But how did that happen? Well, on one of the primary systems, a power operated valve had stuck open, and the indication was that the valve was closed. So the operators questioned what was going on, and they distrusted some of the indications that they were getting, and hence they did not react properly to what was going on, the depressurizing of the system and the loss of the coolant, in the core. and they ended up uncovering the core, melting a portion of the core, and ultimately making the reactor no more than a trash heap. So very expensive, very costly, not just to the owners of 3 Mile Island, but to the industry. So the NRC followed up with new regulation. I very simplified it here. They focused on a new approach to training of the operators so that they could recognize accidents and threats to the core, changes in their emergency procedures, and then requirements for new instrumentation so that in the control room, the operators would have more than one indication of important parameters. And these new instruments, were what they call redundant and diverse. In other words, they were powered from different sources, they were different types, so that the operators would have the best information they could. Anyway, there's a picture of 3 Mile Island today. On the right is Unit 1, which is still operating. It's clear that it's in operation because the cooling tower is putting out vapor. On the left-hand side is the damaged unit. It's been contained and decontaminated, and that's how it stands today. Chernobyl. So, unlike 3 Mile Island, as far as in the US, the Chernobyl accident did not result in any new regulations. And that was because the Russians, they had a whole different approach to, I'm going to be a little bit, I don't know, candid or whatever. They didn't look to protect their populations or whatever. They felt that they were smarter than anyone else. So they didn't even put containments around their reactors. And they lacked safety systems. And because their design, it's the only place their design was used was in the Soviet Union. It didn't impact US or Western reactors because the design was so different. But the accident happened because workers were performing a test and they were doing it outside of approved guidelines. And you can see HBO did a 3-part docudrama. It's a great docudrama. And as I'll say, nuclear professional, although of course it's dramatized, it's a pretty good depiction. I have to say, I was watching it, and as they went through, they were showing, the inside the control room and what they were doing in the series. And I was sitting there, and when they started to say what they were doing, I was screaming at the screen, "Don't do that!" It was like one of those horror movies where the beautiful young people are about to, go down in the dark basement. Why would you do that? And I'm there in front of the screen. Don't do that. Anyway, they caused their own issue. It was horrific. There was a steam explosion that destroyed the reactor core. They had like an open core and it was surrounded by graphite. So there was fuel pieces and graphite scattered all over the place. Many of the operators and the first responders received lethal doses. They didn't die immediately. They died horrible deaths due to extreme radiation exposure. But that HBO docudrama was pretty well done. There's a picture of Chernobyl after the accident. Pretty rough looking, huh? The area kind of on the right-hand side is where the reactor was. You can see that it was just destroyed everything. It caught on fire. The graphite, they use a graphite surrounding their fuel. The graphite caught on fire. It spewed tons of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Pretty scary. Fukushima, 2011. oh, by the way, I didn't say the dates. I think it was on the screen though. 3 Mile Island, 1979. Chernobyl, 1986, and Fukushima in 2011. It was the result. It was one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded, and it was just off the shore, off the coast of Japan. There was a 50 to 60 foot tsunami wave, or series of waves that came in, and I'll show you. There's a little depiction as we go further on. The wave, it was. I mean, can you imagine here, even in Massachusetts, how low-lying the land is near the shore? There's nothing high here. How far and how much that would cover? It's just from the tsunami alone, it was devastating to the area. But it wiped out all power sources to the plant. It wiped out. It knocked down all the transmission lines. It flooded out their standby diesel generators. It flooded out their electrical distribution system, so that they're sitting there in the dark with no power, and they could their designs with all the backup systems that they had. Their designs required that they have power to operate them to keep the reactor cores cool, and they melted down the cores of 3 plants. And then probably some of the worst contamination of the surrounding area was that their fuel pools, without any cooling over an extended period of time, boiled down to the point that they exposed and damaged the fuel in the fuel pools, and hence spread contamination in the surrounding area. Anyway, it's terrible, but wrong way. So the aftershock, lots of changes in the nuclear power in the US after. A lot of stuff that the general public doesn't see as far as the changes, but it required that the utilities have new and independent equipment in safe areas, safe from any imaginable event damaging it. And I actually worked on the Fukushima upgrade project. In any case, it costs about $60 million per nuclear site to make the changes. So it was interesting. Here's a picture of Fukushima after the accident. What you see there are 2, I think that's Unit 1 and Unit 2. Unit 3 is off to the right. Unit 3 did not, they didn't have as much damage. They were actually shut down and in a, were not operating, so they didn't have as much heat to deal with. So they didn't have as much damage, but the first 2, those are the reactor buildings and the turbine buildings next door. Real devastation. Here gives you an idea of the wave. You know, it shows normal sea level. They had a seawall that was 5.7 meters, which is close to 20 feet above the sea level. Then the normal grade at the plant was, lower grade anyway, was 4 meters. Where the plant was, the normal grade level was 10 meters or 30 feet above the sea level. And there you can see that, though, you know, the 50-foot wave, you know, was basically, you know, as much as 20 feet or more above the normal grade level, and flooded out and destroyed their electrical supplies. All right, spent fuel. Okay, so I went through mining, big disasters, spent fuel. So little interest. So all of the spent fuel generated during the life of 40-year or more life of the plant is stored on site. And it's typically 1/3 of the core is replaced at each refueling, which is about every 2 years. All of this fuel is stored in a large, what we call the fuel pool, approximately 30 by 40 feet in length and width and 40 feet deep. That's all of the spent fuel for 40 years. At Pilgrim, it was shy of 4,000 fuel assemblies. So all of the waste can fit in a very small footprint, a fraction of the size of like a football field. In that pool, the water is cooled to remove the decay heat, and it's filtered to keep it clean and clear. So just a perspective, I did it at one time. I kind of did a calculation to see, because I wanted to know, well, how much heat is this? Not long after they've offloaded the fuel from the reactor, and say after a refueling with some new fuel and old fuel or whatever, the amount of heat is about, I think it was, I want to get this right. I think it was 10,000 BTUs per hour, which is, no, sorry, less than that, 5,000. Bottom line is, a typical household heating system is 100,000 BTUs per hour, or something less. A very common size for like a gas furnace or whatever. It's 100,000 BTUs. So it's about, it would be something less than 100 furnaces that you're removing the heat for. In any case, again, so this is called dry cask storage. This is what the plants are doing that are shut down, and what they do with their fuel after they don't want to, they're not operating the reactor anymore, and they don't want to spend money on cooling the fuel. These dry casks, these are the real deal, by the way. Each one of those holds about, I think, 65 fuel assemblies. It is cooled by the air, natural circulation. These casks are actually loaded so that they have enough shielding between concrete and steel that the radiation level on the outside of the cask is very low. As you can see, these guys are standing right next to it. And I've actually stood right next to it, a spent fuel cask, very low levels of radiation. For Pilgrim Station, I think they, again, approximately 80 of these are necessary to store all of the fuel. And they would sit on an area, concrete pad about twice the size of a football field. So not a lot for 40 years of waste. Nobody's going to mess with them. You can't knock them over. They stand about 20 feet tall, 12 feet in diameter, and weigh in excess of 360,000 pounds. They're not going anywhere. The wind's not going to blow them over. That concrete pad it's on is 3 foot thick of heavily steel reinforced concrete. They're designed, again, not to be affected by wind, storm, plane crash, or earthquake. So here, and I know I'm running a little bit behind time. I'm a little too wordy. The future. The new direction is what they call, is referred to as small modular reactors. They are the key part of the way path forward. So the whole idea with being the small part. What they have found is that if you keep the reactor vessel small, you don't need power operated systems to keep it cool in the event of a total loss of power on-site and off-site. So that's the approach. They're small, they're modulated. Because they're small, the siting is flexible. You don't need the big sites. What's really great about them is that they're going to pair well with renewable sources. You can use them in combination, because we know that wind is great, but what happens when the wind dies? Solar is only good for so many hours during the day, and then there's nighttime. So you need something, either energy storage of some sort, batteries or otherwise, or with this new technology, they hope to pair them together to have a synergistic site. The safeguards and security are better. Here's my little cartoon. Same guy, 40 years later. Hopefully changing minds towards the future. Nuclear being green energy. Here, this picture, you see a nuclear power plant in the background, companion windmill, some solar. It's a visual just to say, hey, this is how it's going to work in the future. They're going to work together. I've done a little write-up on two of the most prominent technologies. One is NuScale. They building their reactors. They're small, like a typical reactor today. The two that they're building are over 1,000 megawatts. Just a perspective, 1,000 megawatts of power, 500,000 households. So the big ones, they provide a lot of power. These modulars are small. I think the NuScale is smaller than 100 megawatts of electric output. They use the same type of light water reactor technology, but because of its size, its simple designs, it eliminates the need for powered safety systems. And what they envision is that, and the next one is that you'll have a site with multiple reactors. So you stack them up, all safe or whatever. They don't all have to be operating at the same time. They're independent. And anyway, and they work well with wind and solar. The other, so this one's an interesting. Bill Gates, I don't know if you've read anything. Bill is really interested in nuclear power. He's put his money into it with other like-minded people to develop the technology to make it safe, affordable, and an abundant carbon-free energy. His company, Terra Power, is in partnership with Hitachi, GE Hitachi Nuclear, and they're developing this, what they call Natrium Technology, which is a molten salt system, fast reactor. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of fast reactors, but it's a very interesting technology. They have been approved by the Department of Energy to build a demonstration plant, and they're projecting in the late 2020s or the early 2030s, they'll be ready to start constructing plants. And the most attractive feature of this is the system as they've designed it has the ability to just store energy in this mass of liquid salt. It's heat energy, and it just is a perfect companion for the wind and solar. Here's Bill. He's thinking hard about it. Bill says, for the naysayer, Bill says, this is the way to go. He says, this is good stuff, and I'm putting my money into it, not to make more money, but to save the human race from themselves with climate change. I threw this in. It's a picture of his reactor. It's a pretty picture. I'm not going to get into the technology, but here here's a depiction of what he would consider a plant is. And what it shows is, kind of down at the lower left, is the reactor plant. It connects through piping, insulated piping, to two storage tanks. One of them contains the hot liquid salt, molten salt, and then the energy, the other building in front of that is where the regular turbine would be that produces the electricity. And then after it releases its energy to make electricity, it comes back into that other storage unit, which is the cooler molten salt. And that's what a plant would look like. I don't know what this physical size is, but there. Oh, so interesting facts. Before we start question and answer, I know I've taken too much time, but I'm going to give you a few little facts. Typical nuclear power plant now, large plant, 1,000 megawatts. It'll power 500,000 U.S. households. Wind, the largest windmills today, largest, most powerful, about 14 megawatts. More typically, it would be 10 megawatts is the readily available large windmill. So that means that you would need 100 of these windmills to replace the 1,000 megawatt plants like they're building in Georgia. However, that wind farm, these windmills are bigger, probably bigger than any of you have seen. Literally, one of these windmills is as tall as the Eiffel Tower. Almost, it's just shy of 1,000 feet tall. So let's just say nominally 900 feet tall, because of how big the rotors are. Big as the Eiffel Tower. A solar farm to produce the same amount of electricity, and I don't mean like in total, but just at the same rate when the sun is shining and they're operating full, would take about 25 square miles. So if you would want one to would produce the same amount of energy, you would need it probably 3 times as big, because it could only, easily produce solar energy a little more than 1/3 of the day. Other things that I kind of missed. Well, I don't know. Maybe it'll come up in question. I'm going to open it up now because I've talked too long.
That was great. I got a question from John Kendrick, but I think you kind of answered it. What would happen if an earthquake destroyed several spent fuel dry cast storage units? But you seem to say that they're pretty protected.
So they've taken them. I think the one test is that they took a train locomotive, I don't know at what speed, somewhere between 60 and 100 miles an hour, and crashed it into one of these. And it did not create enough damage that it would damage the fuel and release any radioactivity.
Yeah, okay. Jim, maybe you could stop your screen share.
Oh, yeah.
And then Craig Blake, well, you got some questions. Why don't you go ahead and ask them? Are you there, Craig? Are you unmuted?
Sorry, I got on mute. I was just interested to get some insight as to why the Navy, or why submarines were the only application that have been determined to be feasible for small reactors. I would think that anything that would fit in a submarine could fit in any other small environment.
Good question. So of the 80 vessels that the Navy has today that are nuclear powered, it's a mix. Aircraft carriers, I think there's 4 right now, biggest cities that is powered by nuclear power. They actually, they're so big, I want to say that the largest aircraft carrier has 8 separate reactors. And cruisers were a good application, because it gives them long range. They don't need to refuel. Typical core for a Navy reactor is 20 years. And literally what they do is when they do refuel, they go into the yard, they remove the whole reactor and put a new one in, and then deal with that separately. So they don't even actually refuel the reactors on board. They just remove the whole reactor. And so aircraft carrier, missile cruisers, and submarines. It's so great for submarines, though. They used to have to, they ran by diesels. They had huge battery banks. So the only way before they could run underwater or stay underwater was running on batteries. And they would have to come to the surface every 12 hours or something.
So if the Navy has figured out a way to get rid of the reactor, the spent reactor, why can't the same application be used for in the commercial? The small, where you just take the reactor and you just, a nuclear reactor for 20 years and you just get rid of it.
Yeah, but it would still have the spent fuel in it. I mean,
right.
It would still have, right, but it would be already contained. Candidly, I don't know how maybe what they used for storage. I know that they have, multiple cores somewhere. It would not surprise me that they have some kind of equivalent to the dry cask storage. So fuel storage, the disposal, great. I probably could have talked for an hour on that, but the government was mandated to provide a single fuel repository, and they just haven't been able to make it happen. Just public sentiment. They've already invested like $10 billion into Yucca Flats in Nevada, that was in a stable geostructure and built-in caves, and but they, at some point the state said, nah, not in our backyard. So there you go.
So anything else, Craig?
I was just interested what you would talk. You started the conversation by saying that to build nuclear plants are really expensive. What's the driver? What drives up the expense?
Regulation, basically regulation and quality assurance. We used to, so if you, let's just say you were buying the same component, let's say the same valve for a nuclear power plant as you would a fossil power plant, and if it's within what I'll call the boundary of safety function, that same valve might cost 10 times as much to fabricate. And it's just because the whole process of fabrication, they would have to have certifications of the material that they were using. They would have to have programs to inspect, measure, test all along the manufacturing process. And it just takes more people, more time, and it costs more. Also, when you build the plant, the workforce has to be highly trained, and you have to have a tremendous amount of oversight, and all of that costs more. So, and it was the time that the high cost of construction was overcome by the relatively low cost of fuel over time. But natural gas, I can tell you that I know from the Pilgrim plant, it was not technology, or it was not, although I thought it was old enough, it was time to shut it down, but it was really the cheap natural gas power.
So Carolyn has a question. You want to ask that, Carolyn?
Yeah, and I guess it's as much of an input to the discussion as the question. I've been studying this area, and right now, the Massachusetts is formalizing their 2030 climate action plan, and that plan includes only solar, wind, and then hydro from Canada. And there's no like baseline fuel or process to mitigate the fluctuations in the solar and the wind. And I feel like it's a very short-sighted plan, and that nuclear would be a necessary, not only great, but a necessary addition to it to make it into a plan that really would serve us all. And I'm just wondering what your comments are about that.
Okay, I do have comments about that. Can you imagine that? So two comments. One is, just think about it. I mean, we've had a couple blackouts in the Northeast, but think about this. Your power coming from Canada, long way away, okay? And there, if you can believe it, there is some environmental impact by having to build this power corridor, the transmission lines down from Canada. But also, let me say this about this, Ontario Hydro, that's probably what they're talking about. 40% of Ontario Hydro's power is nuclear.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I think it's, I could Google it now, or you can Google it, and Google Ontario Hydro. I believe that their hydro portion of the power is something less than 20%.
Wow.
So it's optics, political optics, I would say. But anyway, so there was more than one part to that question. I had to think. Ontario Hydro. Yeah.
Actually, they talk about Quebec, so I don't know that it is Ontario, but nevertheless, I'm sure there's smoke and mirrors there. It seems like the accidents. I mean, you listed 3 accidents, and Fukushima. I was just looking at that this morning. Had 0 deaths from their accident. But it's just blown up. It's like an airplane crash. We all know that there are more automobile deaths than there are, per mile than airplane. But as soon as there's one, it just gets all of the attention. And I think the same thing happens for nuclear accidents. There are far more people killed in drilling for oil or gas, or even solar, people falling off roofs or whatever. And if you look at the statistics, it really is far worse. And I think the biggest problem, even a bigger problem than technological problems, is fear. And we need somehow to help people get over it.
So the nuclear power industry has been very ineffective at doing that properly. There have been some attempts, at winning the public over, and maybe to some extent you can. Some people, I can promise you that there are some people that, no matter what statistics, what persuasive argument that you're going to make, you're not going to change their minds. They just not. But it's a tough subject. Believe me, 45 years. You can't imagine how many times I've gone to a cocktail party and made the mistake of when somebody asked me what I did, that I said I worked at a nuclear power plant and spent the rest of the evening defending myself.
Right.
Verbally.
And they treated you like you were, radioactive, right?
Yeah, maybe, or either that or Charlie Manson in disguise. I can admit to you, there were some times I said, well, you know, so it's something else, like I work for a tech company, or something that people say, oh, isn't that nice,
So I got another
Anyway.
a question from James Staley. The half-life of nuclear waste was approximately 10,000 years. How long can the containers last?
I don't know what the design is. A long, long time. So, but think of this. Okay, one of the reasons that they don't just bury it is, it doesn't have anything to do with containing the radiation or that. The reason they were putting it into like a vault, a cave, a stable cave, is that at some time in the future we're going to want to get back at it. When we conquer, effective reprocessing and stuff, because in fact, in that spent fuel, there is much of the energy available is still there. The only reason that it's no longer used is that it gets, with all the fissions that goes on, it's the byproducts. The byproducts, over time, you get enough of them that some of them absorb neutrons. And after a while, you've got so much material absorbing neutrons that you cannot effectively continue to fission, the fuel. So what I would propose is that you want to put it someplace that's going to last, for hundreds of years. But we will likely want to get back at it sometime, so that we don't have to mine uranium. That we'll be able to get that uranium and use it to its fullest. Maybe we'll be using it in a Bill Gates reactor.
Got another question from Rick Gentleman. Is France still mostly nuclear, and what are they doing differently?
Okay. Good question. All right. So the answer is yes. France produces greater than 80% of their electric supply with nuclear power. What they did right is the government was involved with their program. They started with one design. The only changes to that design was, I'll say, in each new generation of plant, they took lessons learned, improvements in the systems, improvement in technology, or whatever. They basically took it's just like maybe a car company does with, the Mustang came out and it was this, and 2 years later, they made it a little bit better, and over time. So they kept with one design. It makes training so much easier because an operator can go from one plant to another seamlessly, by having a single design and a very limited number of primary contractors. The expertise to build these was concentrated. They had economy that way. Yeah, they did. Of any country, they did it right. And yeah.
What's Germany doing now?
So I had that on one of my slides, and then I didn't follow through with it. Okay. As a result, and I'm going to just read this, and you'll have to excuse me. As a result of the Fukushima accident, Germany planned to close all of its plants by 2022. Italy had a referendum that forbade consumption of nuclear generation. China, Switzerland, Israel, Malaysia, Thailand, the United United Kingdom and the Philippines all reviewed their nuclear power programs. And most of them, you know, have either stopped building new plants or, as in the case of Germany, they're shutting them all down. Here's something to think about, though. China has 45 reactors in operation. 13 more are under construction, and they plan to build another 43, which would make them the world's largest generator of nuclear electricity in the world. And India is following suit with their own aggressive nuclear development program. So,
Wow, that's great.
yeah.
So one more question from anybody? This has been a great presentation.
Well, I hope everybody got something out of it.
Oh, I think
yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been great.
Okay.
What was that, Carolyn?
I just said thank you. It's been great. And I've written a comment for the 2030 roadmap. If anybody is interested in reading it and signing it, somehow let me know, and I'll get it to you.
Great. All right. Thanks, Jim. That was a terrific presentation.
Very good.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yes,
Sorry for going a little long.
That's
Yeah.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye-bye.